The stagecoach lurched violently as it careened around the mountain pass, and Olivia Fletcher pressed herself against the worn leather seat, her knuckles white as she gripped the window frame with trembling fingers. Every shadow beyond the glass looked like bandits, every sound like gunfire, every jostle like impending death. She had left Boston 3 weeks ago with nothing but 2 trunks and a heart full of dread, traveling to Boise, Idaho in 1878 to claim an inheritance from an uncle she had barely known. The journey had been a waking nightmare of fears realized and anxieties magnified. And now, as the stage rolled into the dusty streets of this frontier town, Olivia felt her chest tighten with the familiar panic that had ruled her life for as long as she could remember. The driver called out their arrival, and she stepped down onto the wooden sidewalk on unsteady legs. Boise was larger than she had expected, with brick buildings rising along Main Street and the smell of sagebrush mixing with wood smoke and horse manure. People moved with purpose around her, men in wide-brimmed hats and women in practical calico dresses, all of them looking so certain of their place in this wild country. Olivia stood frozen, her carpetbag clutched to her chest like a shield, unable to make her feet move toward the hotel across the street. "Miss, you all right?" The stage driver peered down at her with concern. "You look like you seen a ghost." "I am fine," she lied, though her voice shook. "Just tired from the journey." He nodded but did not look convinced, and Olivia forced herself to pick up her bag and walk. She made it exactly 3 steps before a horse and rider came galloping past, far too close to the sidewalk. She jerked backward with a strangled cry, dropping her bag and stumbling into a hitching post. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst from her ribs. Whoa there! Strong hands steadied her shoulders, and she looked up into a weathered face beneath a black Stetson. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, probably in his mid-20s, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of whiskey in firelight. A silver star gleamed on his vest. That fool rider should know better than to tear through town like that. "You hurt?" Olivia shook her head, unable to speak past the lump of fear in her throat. She was acutely aware of how ridiculous she must look, terrified by a simple horse and rider when everyone else barely glanced their way. The lawman retrieved her bag and handed it to her with a gentle smile. "You must be Miss Fletcher. We do not get many newcomers, and the postmaster mentioned you would be arriving today. I am Wade Norris, deputy here in Boise." "How do you know I am Miss Fletcher?" The question came out sharper than she intended, laced with anxiety. "Your Uncle Robert mentioned he had a niece in Boston," Wade said easily. "And like I said, we do not get many strangers. I am sorry for your loss. Robert was a good man." Olivia nodded stiffly. She had not known her uncle well enough to mourn him properly, though she tried to feel appropriately sad. Mostly she felt terrified of being here, of the wild country, of the unknown future stretching before her like an abyss. "Let me help you to the hotel," Wade offered, picking up her bag before she could protest. "The Silver Creek Hotel is just across the way. Mrs. Patterson runs a clean establishment, and she will take good care of you." Olivia wanted to refuse, wanted to tell him she could manage on her own, but the words would not come. She was too tired and too afraid, and the warmth in his eyes made something in her chest ache with longing for safety she had never quite felt anywhere. They crossed the street together, Wade walking slowly beside her as though sensing her fear of the horses and wagons. Inside the hotel, he spoke quietly with the proprietress while Olivia stood trembling in the lobby, overwhelmed by the simple act of being in a new place. "Miss Fletcher, I have your room ready," Mrs. Patterson said kindly. She was a plump woman with graying hair and a motherly smile. "Second floor overlooking the street. Deputy Norris here tells me you have had a long journey." Yes, thank you. Olivia managed to make her voice work, though it came out barely above a whisper. Wade carried her bag upstairs and set it inside the modest room with its iron bedstead and washstand. He paused in the doorway, hat in his hands, studying her with those perceptive eyes. "Miss Fletcher, I do not mean to pry, but you seem mighty unsettled. Is there something specific worrying you, or is it just the general strangeness of a new place?" Olivia looked at him, at this stranger with the kind face and the lawman's star, and something inside her cracked. "I am terrified of everything," she whispered, the confession tumbling out before she could stop it. "The journey here, this town, the horses, the noise, the silence, the people, being alone. Everything. I have been this way my whole life, and I do not know how to be different." She expected him to laugh or look at her with pity or worse, with contempt. Instead, Wade stepped closer and met her eyes with a steadiness that made her breath catch. "Then I will be brave enough for both of us," he said quietly. "You are not alone here, Miss Fletcher. I give you my word on that." The simple declaration should have sounded absurd coming from a man she had just met, but something in his voice made Olivia believe him. For the first time since leaving Boston, she felt a tiny spark of hope kindle in her chest. Wade visited her the next morning, bringing fresh bread from the bakery and offering to show her around town. Olivia hesitated, her instinct to refuse and hide in her room warring with the unexpected desire to see him again. The desire won. They walked slowly down Main Street, Wade pointing out the mercantile, the church, the schoolhouse, the saloons and restaurants and smithy. Boise was growing rapidly, he explained, with the railroad promising to arrive within a few years and bringing prosperity with it. Olivia tried to listen, but she was distracted by every dog that barked, every door that slammed, every stranger who looked their way. "Your uncle's property is about 2 miles outside town," Wade said as they paused in front of the land office. "Small ranch, maybe 50 acres with a decent house and barn. Robert raised cattle, had a few good years before the consumption took him. The property is yours now, along with whatever stock remains." "I do not know anything about ranching," Olivia said, panic rising in her throat. "I cannot possibly manage a ranch. I can barely manage walking down this street without feeling like I might faint." Wade guided her to a bench outside the general store and sat beside her, waiting patiently while she tried to calm her racing heart. "You do not have to decide anything right now," he said gently. "The property is not going anywhere. You could sell it if you wanted, or hire someone to run it, or learn to run it yourself. There is no rush." "Why are you being so kind to me?" Olivia asked suddenly, turning to look at him. "You do not know me. I am just some frightened woman who cannot even cross the street without panicking." Wade was quiet for a moment, his gaze steady on her face. "My younger sister was like you," he said finally. "Afraid of her own shadow, my pa used to say, though not in a mean way. She would shake at loud noises and cry if she had to speak to strangers. My pa did not have much patience for it, thought she just needed to toughen up. But I saw how real her fear was, how much it hurt her to be that way. I used to sit with her in the barn during thunderstorms, or walk her to school when she was too scared to go alone. Made sure she knew she was not facing things by herself." "What happened to her?" Olivia asked softly. "She got sick when she was 12. Fever took her in 3 days." Wade's voice was level, but she could hear the old pain beneath it. "I have always wished I could have been there at the end, but I was away working a cattle drive. By the time I got home, she was already buried." Olivia reached out without thinking and touched his hand where it rested on his knee. "I am so sorry." He turned his hand over and squeezed her fingers gently before letting go. "Point is, I understand what it is like to be afraid, and I know that telling someone to just stop being scared does not help one bit." But having someone stand with you while you face the fear, that can make all the difference. Over the following days, Wade made good on his promise. He came by the hotel each morning and accompanied Olivia on small expeditions into town. They visited the mercantile, where she tried on new gloves with shaking hands while he chatted easily with the shopkeeper. They ate lunch at a small restaurant, where Olivia forced herself to sit facing the room instead of hiding in a corner. They walked to the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open prairie, and Wade taught her the names of the plants, sagebrush and bitterroot and wild lupine. Slowly, incrementally, Boise began to feel less like enemy territory. Olivia learned to recognize the familiar faces, the rhythm of the town's daily life. Mrs. Patterson at the hotel became a friendly presence, always ready with tea and conversation. The mercantile owner, Mr. Carson, learned that Olivia liked licorice and started keeping some aside for her. The banker, a stern man named Holloway, proved surprisingly gentle when Olivia came to discuss her inheritance, speaking slowly and clearly as Wade sat beside her for support. But it was Wade himself who became her anchor. She found herself watching for him each morning, her heart lifting when she saw his tall figure striding up the hotel steps. He never pushed her too hard, never made her feel foolish for her fears, but he also never let her retreat entirely into safety. He coaxed her forward step by careful step, and she found herself trusting him in a way she had never trusted anyone. One afternoon, 2 weeks after her arrival, Wade suggested they ride out to see her uncle's property. Olivia's first instinct was to refuse. The thought of riding a horse, of being out in the open country away from town, sent her pulse racing with anxiety. But she looked at Wade's patient, encouraging face and heard herself say yes. He brought a gentle mare named Daisy, old and calm and utterly uninterested in anything but the occasional mouthful of grass. Wade helped Olivia into the saddle, his hand steady on her waist, and then mounted his own gelding. They rode slowly out of town, Wade keeping his horse close to hers, talking in that easy way of his about the land and the weather and the family of hawks nesting in the cottonwoods by the creek. The ranch was modest but well kept, with a sturdy log house, a barn in good repair, and corrals that held a small herd of cattle. Olivia dismounted on wobbly legs and looked around at this property that was somehow now hers. It felt surreal, like someone else's life that she had accidentally stepped into. "Your uncle built most of this himself," Wade said, walking beside her toward the house. "He was a private man, kept to himself mostly, but he was respected, honest and hardworking." Inside, the house was dusty but furnished, with a kitchen, a sitting room and 2 bedrooms. Someone had covered the furniture with sheets, and the whole place had the sad, still feeling of a home abandoned. Olivia walked from room to room, trying to imagine living here, trying to imagine being the kind of person who could manage a ranch and livestock and the vast responsibility of it all. "I cannot do this," she said finally, her voice breaking. "Wade, I cannot. I am not strong enough or brave enough or capable enough. I will fail at everything." Wade had been examining the stove in the kitchen, but he turned at her words and crossed to where she stood in the doorway. "You have been braver than you know these past 2 weeks," he said. "You came all the way from Boston to a place you had never seen. You have walked through town every day even though it scares you. You got on a horse today. Those are not small things, Olivia." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his warm, steady voice made her chest tighten with emotion. "But this," she gestured helplessly at the house around them, "this is too much. Living out here alone, managing animals and crops and all the things I know nothing about." "Who says you would be alone?" Wade asked quietly, and something in his tone made her look up sharply. He was watching her with an intensity she had not seen before, his whiskey-colored eyes serious. "Olivia, I know we have not known each other long, and I know you came here dealing with enough without some cowboy deputy complicating things. But I have to be honest with you. I think about you all the time. I wake up looking forward to seeing you. When I am working, I find myself wondering what you are doing, if you are all right, if you need anything. And it is not just because you remind me of my sister. It is because you are kind and honest, and you are trying so damn hard to face down your fears, even when it would be easier to give up. You are beautiful and interesting, and I find myself wanting to know everything about you." Olivia stared at him, her heart pounding for an entirely different reason now. "Wade, I am a mess. I can barely function. Why would you want to tie yourself to someone like me?" He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the faint scar on his jaw, the laugh lines at the corners of his eyes. "Because when I am with you, I feel like I am doing something that matters. Because you make me want to be the best version of myself. Because I think we could be good together if you would give us a chance." "I am afraid," she whispered, but this time the fear was different, tinged with longing and possibility. "I know," Wade said gently, "but I meant what I said that first day. I will be brave enough for both of us, for as long as you need me to be." He lifted his hand slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her cheek. His palm was warm and calloused, and Olivia found herself leaning into the touch, her eyes drifting closed. When his lips brushed hers, soft and questioning, she kissed him back with a desperation that surprised her. She had been so alone for so long, so wrapped up in her fears that she had forgotten what it felt like to want something, to reach for something beyond mere survival. Wade's arms came around her, pulling her close, and for a moment, Olivia let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have this. That maybe she could be the kind of woman who lived on a ranch and loved a good man and faced her fears with someone brave enough to stand beside her. They spent the rest of the afternoon at the ranch, making plans. Wade knew a family who could help manage the cattle until Olivia learned the ropes herself. He suggested hiring a housekeeper from town, someone who could help her settle in and teach her the practical skills she would need. They talked about repairs the house needed, about which livestock to keep and which to sell, about 100 practical details that made the impossible seem almost manageable. As the sun began to set, painting the Idaho sky in shades of gold and crimson, they rode back to town together. Olivia felt lighter than she had in years, as though Wade's steady presence had lifted some of the weight she had been carrying. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Olivia had read about in novels. There were no grand balls or formal calling hours, no chaperones hovering at every turn. Instead, there were quiet evenings on the hotel porch, Wade teaching her to identify constellations while she fought the urge to worry about mountain lions or bandits or any of the 1,000 dangers her mind conjured. There were Sunday services at the little church, where Wade sat beside her and held her hand when the crowd made her anxious. There were trips back to the ranch, where they worked side by side to clean and repair and make the place livable. Wade introduced her to Martha Torres, a widow in her 50s who agreed to come work as Olivia's housekeeper and companion. Martha was a no-nonsense woman with strong opinions and a kind heart, and she took to Olivia immediately, seeming to understand without being told that her new employer needed patience and gentle encouragement. With Martha's help, Olivia began to learn the rhythms of ranch life. How to gather eggs from the chickens without jumping at every squawk, how to bake bread in the temperamental stove, how to keep accounts and mend clothes, and the 100 other skills that made up a frontier woman's daily work. It was hard, exhausting, often terrifying, but Olivia kept at it because Wade was always there. He stopped by the ranch every evening after his deputy duties were done, helping with the heavier chores and eating dinner with her and Martha. They talked about everything and nothing, his stories of growing up in Wyoming mixing with her memories of Boston, two different worlds finding common ground. One evening in early September, 6 weeks after Olivia had arrived in Boise, they sat together on the porch as twilight deepened into night. Martha had gone to bed, and they were alone except for the chorus of crickets and the occasional lowing of cattle in the distance. "I have been thinking," Wade said, his arm around Olivia's shoulders as she leaned against him. "My deputy wages are not much, but I have been saving for a few years now. Combined with what this ranch brings in, we could manage pretty well. Maybe expand the herd, hire some help, make this into something real." Olivia's heart quickened, though she tried to keep her voice steady. "That sounds like you are talking about a future together." "I am." Wade shifted to look at her, his expression serious in the lamplight spilling from the window. "I am talking about marriage, Olivia. I am talking about building a life here with you. I know it is fast, and I know you are still finding your feet in this country, but I am certain. I love you. I want to wake up beside you every morning and face whatever comes together." Olivia felt tears prick her eyes. A year ago, even a month ago, the idea of marriage would have terrified her. Binding herself legally to another person, making herself vulnerable, trusting someone with that much power over her life. But Wade had shown her a different way of being. He had been patient when she panicked, steady when she wavered, brave when she could not be. He had kept every promise he made, and slowly, carefully, she had learned to trust him. "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling both terrifying and absolutely right. "I never thought I could feel this way about anyone. I never thought anyone would want me with all my fears and anxieties. But you do, and that makes me believe that maybe I can be more than I thought possible." Wade kissed her then, deep and sweet and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, he was grinning. "So is that a yes?" "Yes," Olivia said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, I will marry you." They were wed in October, when the aspens had turned gold on the mountains, and the air carried the first hints of coming winter. The ceremony took place in the small church, with most of the town in attendance. Olivia wore a dress of ivory silk that Mrs. Patterson had helped her order from a catalog, and Wade wore a new suit that made him look uncomfortable but handsome. Martha cried through the entire service, and even the usually stern banker Holloway smiled. Olivia had worried she would panic during the ceremony, that the crowd and the attention would overwhelm her. But when she walked down the aisle and saw Wade waiting at the altar, his face full of love and pride and that steadiness that had become her touchstone, all the fear melted away. She felt only joy and gratitude, and the fierce, unexpected courage that came from knowing she was not facing anything alone. They honeymooned at the ranch, which made Martha laugh and declare them the most practical newlyweds she had ever seen. But Olivia did not want to go anywhere else. This was her home now, these rolling hills and wide skies, this sturdy house that she and Wade would fill with their life together. The first winter was hard. Olivia struggled with the isolation when snow blocked the roads, struggled with the howling wind and the bitter cold and the constant work of keeping animals alive in harsh conditions. But Wade was always there, his presence a bulwark against her fears. He taught her to see the beauty in the stark winter landscape, the way sunlight glittered on fresh snow, the stark silhouettes of bare trees against pale sky. He held her through the long, dark nights when her anxieties crept back, whispering reassurances until she could breathe again. And slowly, so slowly Olivia almost did not notice, she began to change. She learned that she could do hard things if she broke them into small enough steps. She learned that facing a fear over and over gradually dulled its power. She learned that she was stronger than she had ever given herself credit for. Spring brought new challenges and new joys. The cattle calving kept them busy around the clock, and Olivia discovered a surprising affinity for the work, her natural caution making her attentive to the small signs that an animal was in distress. They hired a young ranch hand named Pete, a cheerful 18-year-old who treated Olivia with respectful friendliness and did not seem to notice or care about her occasional panic attacks. Wade continued his work as deputy, but he talked more and more about leaving the position to focus on the ranch. The new sheriff, a hard man from Texas, did not share Wade's patient approach to law enforcement, and there was tension between them. Olivia worried about him every day he wore the star, terrified that he would be hurt or killed in some confrontation. Her fears were not entirely irrational. The territory could still be violent and unpredictable, and lawmen faced real danger. In June, her fears nearly came true. Wade confronted a group of drunk cowboys who were tearing up one of the saloons, and in the resulting scuffle, one of them drew a knife. Wade was slashed across the ribs, a wound that bled spectacularly but thankfully was not deep. When Pete came racing to the ranch with the news that Wade had been hurt, Olivia felt her entire world narrow to a single point of terror. She rode into town faster than she had ever ridden, her fear for herself completely eclipsed by fear for him. She found him at the doctor's office, sitting shirtless on the examination table while Dr. Morrison stitched him up. Blood covered his side and the bandages already applied, and Olivia felt her knees go weak, but she did not faint. She did not run. She walked straight to Wade and took his hand, holding tight while the doctor finished his work. Wade looked at her with surprise and something like awe. "You rode in alone," he said. "Olivia, you hate riding fast. You hate coming into town by yourself." "You were hurt," she said simply, tears streaming down her face. Nothing else mattered. That night, as they lay in bed with Wade's bandaged ribs pressed carefully against her back, he said quietly, "I am going to resign from the deputy position. I have been thinking about it for a while, but today made up my mind. I do not want you to spend every day afraid I will not come home. And truth is, I would rather spend my time building something with you than chasing criminals for a sheriff I do not respect." Olivia turned in his arms, careful not to jostle his injury. "I do not want to be the reason you give up something important to you." "You are not," Wade assured her. "The ranch is what is important to me. You are what is important to me. Building a future together, that is what I want." The deputy work was just a job, and it is time for something new. He resigned the following week, and they threw themselves fully into ranch life. With both of them working full-time and Pete's energetic help, the ranch began to truly prosper. They expanded the herd, improved the irrigation for the hay fields, built a larger barn. Wade proved to have a knack for breeding cattle, selecting for temperament and hardiness, and within 2 years their stock was in demand throughout the territory. Olivia discovered her own talents. She took over the ranch's accounts and proved to have a head for numbers and business. She negotiated fiercely with buyers, her determination to secure fair prices overriding her social anxiety. She started a small vegetable garden that grew into a large one, supplying not just their household but several families in town. Martha taught her to preserve and pickle and smoke meat, and Olivia found satisfaction in the rows of gleaming jars in the cellar, tangible proof that she could provide and plan ahead. In the winter of 1881, Olivia realized she was pregnant. The discovery brought a whole new category of fears. She was terrified of childbirth, terrified of something going wrong, terrified that she would not be a good mother, that her anxieties would somehow harm her child. But Wade held her through every moment of panic, his steady presence anchoring her as always. "You are going to be an amazing mother," he told her one night as they lay together, his hand spread across her gently swelling belly. "You have faced so many fears already and overcome them. You will face this one too, and I will be right beside you the whole time." Their son was born in August of 1882, a healthy baby with Wade's eyes and a surprisingly loud cry. They named him Samuel, after Wade's father. The birth was long and difficult, and there were moments when Olivia was certain she would die from the pain and fear. But Dr. Morrison was skilled and patient. Martha held her hand and spoke soothing words in Spanish and English, and Wade never left her side. When she finally held Samuel in her arms, exhausted and overwhelmed and more in love than she had thought possible, Olivia felt something shift deep inside her. She had created life. She had endured something that terrified her and survived. She was stronger than any fear. Motherhood brought new challenges, but they were challenges Olivia found herself equipped to handle. She was naturally cautious and attentive, qualities that served her well with an infant. When Samuel cried, she learned to interpret his different sounds. When he was sick, she nursed him with fierce determination. When he began to crawl and then walk, she hovered protectively but tried not to let her fears smother him. Wade was a devoted father, patient and playful in ways that made Olivia fall in love with him all over again. He carved toys for Samuel, taught him to recognize bird calls, carried him through the fields pointing out cattle and horses, and explaining the work of the ranch. On Sunday afternoons, they would often ride out as a family, Samuel secure in front of Wade on the saddle, exploring the property and the wild country beyond. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and work and slow, steady growth. Samuel grew into a bright, energetic boy with his father's easy charm and his mother's careful observation of the world. Martha remained with them, becoming more family than employee, spoiling Samuel outrageously and running the household with cheerful tyranny. Pete eventually married and moved to his own small spread nearby, but they remained close friends, helping each other through hard times. In 1885, Olivia gave birth to twin daughters, Clara and Rose. The pregnancy had been difficult, and the birth even more so, but both babies were healthy and strong. Wade hired additional help so Olivia would not be overwhelmed, and together they navigated the exhausting chaos of 3 small children. Olivia's fears never disappeared entirely. There were still days when anxiety gripped her, when she struggled with panic over imagined disasters or worst-case scenarios. But the fears no longer ruled her life. She had learned to breathe through them, to recognize them for what they were, to keep moving forward even when her heart raced and her hands shook. And she had Wade, always Wade, steady and brave and absolutely certain that they could handle whatever came. The ranch continued to prosper. By 1888, they employed 5 full-time hands and ran nearly 200 head of cattle. They had added sheep as well, and Olivia discovered a talent for working with wool, learning to spin and weave, and eventually selling her textiles in town. The house had been expanded twice, with a larger kitchen, a proper dining room, and upstairs bedrooms for the children. Boise itself was growing rapidly. The railroad had finally arrived in 1887, bringing commerce and people and transforming the rough frontier town into a proper city. There were electric lights now on Main Street, a telephone exchange, even talk of paved roads. Wade sometimes marveled at how much had changed since Olivia first arrived 20 years ago, frightened and alone and convinced she could not survive. Samuel grew into a strong, capable young man who loved the ranch and seemed destined to take it over someday. The twins were as different as two girls could be. Clara was quiet and studious, always with her nose in a book, while Rose was adventurous and fearless, constantly getting into scrapes that made Olivia's anxious heart stutter. But both girls were loved fiercely, raised in a home full of warmth and security and the knowledge that they were valued. On a warm evening in September 1898, Olivia and Wade sat on their porch watching the sun set behind the mountains. It had become their habit over the years, this quiet time together at day's end, a chance to reconnect after the busy demands of the ranch and family. Samuel was 26 now, married to a sweet girl named Anna, and living in the foreman's cottage with their baby daughter. The twins were 17, both attending the newly expanded school in town and driving their mother crazy with their very different but equally exasperating romantic entanglements. "You ever think about that first day?" Wade asked, his arm around Olivia's shoulders as she leaned against him. "When you got off that stage looking like you might bolt back onto it at any second?" Olivia laughed softly. "I think about it all the time. I was so terrified. Of everything. I could not imagine living here, could not imagine surviving, let alone thriving." "You told me you were terrified of everything," Wade said, kissing the top of her head. "And I told you I would be brave enough for both of us." "You were," Olivia said, turning to look up at him. His hair was streaked with silver now, his face more deeply lined, but his eyes were still that warm, whiskey color, still full of the steadiness that had drawn her to him. "You were brave enough, and patient enough, and kind enough. You taught me that courage is not the absence of fear. It is moving forward despite the fear. You taught me that I was stronger than I knew." "You taught yourself that," Wade corrected gently. "I just stood beside you while you did the hard work. We did it together," Olivia insisted. "Everything we built, everything we have, we did it together. I could never have done any of it alone." Wade pulled her closer, and they sat in comfortable silence as the sky deepened from gold to pink to purple. In the barn, they could hear the evening sounds of horses settling and cattle lowing. From the house came the sound of the twins arguing about something, their voices rising and falling in familiar rhythm. The air smelled of dust and grass, and the faint sweetness of Martha's apple pie cooling in the kitchen. "I love you," Olivia said softly. "I have loved you from almost the beginning, but I love you more with every year that passes. Thank you for being brave enough for both of us, and for teaching me to be brave too." "I love you too," Wade murmured against her hair, "more than I can ever properly say. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Olivia Norris. You and the life we built together." They sat together as night fell, two people who had found each other across fear and distance and improbable circumstances, who had built something beautiful from the raw materials of courage and love and unwavering commitment. The Wild West was fading into memory, replaced by railroads and electricity, and the march of progress, but here on this ranch in the Idaho foothills, the things that mattered remained unchanged. Hard work and honest dealing, family and faith, and the fierce devotion of two hearts that had chosen each other against all odds. Inside the house, Martha called that dinner was ready, and the twins' argument dissolved into laughter. Samuel and Anna would be coming up from the cottage soon, bringing little Rachel to see her grandparents. The evening stretched ahead, full of the ordinary magic of family gathered around a table, sharing food and stories and the comfortable ease of people who belonged together. Wade stood and offered Olivia his hand, pulling her to her feet with the same gentle care he had shown that first day in Boise, when she was too frightened to even cross a street alone. She took his hand as she always had, as she always would, and together they walked inside to the warm, bright kitchen where their family waited. The fears that had once ruled Olivia's life were still there, would always be there in some form, but they were small now, manageable, just one part of a life rich with joy and purpose and love. She had been terrified of everything, and he had been brave enough for both of them until she learned to be brave herself. Together, they had built not just a ranch but a legacy, not just survived but thrived, transforming fear into courage and loneliness into belonging. It was more than Olivia had ever dreamed possible that dusty afternoon in 1878, when she stepped off a stage in Boise and into the rest of her life. It was everything she had never known to hope for, and it was hers, earned through struggle and faith and the extraordinary gift of Wade's steadfast love. The years that followed brought their own joys and sorrows, as years always do. Samuel proved to be an excellent rancher, managing the expanding operation with skill and innovation, while Wade gradually stepped back into a more advisory role. Anna gave them 3 more grandchildren, a house full of noise and energy and the particular chaos of childhood. Clara eventually went east to attend college, one of the first women from Boise to do so, studying literature and returning to teach at the local school. Rose married a young veterinarian and settled nearby, her fearless energy channeled into building his practice and raising her own brood of adventurous children. Martha passed away peacefully in 1905 at the age of 73, surrounded by the family she had chosen and who had chosen her in return. They buried her in the small cemetery on a hill overlooking the ranch, and Olivia planted roses on her grave every spring, remembering the woman who had patiently taught her to bake bread and keep house and believe in her own competence. Wade developed arthritis in his knees and hands as he aged, the price of years of hard physical labor, but he remained active and engaged with the ranch and their growing family. Olivia's hair turned silver, and she finally needed spectacles for close work, but her mind stayed sharp and her hands nimble. She continued to weave and garden, to keep the ranch accounts, to be the steady center around which their family revolved. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1908, their children and grandchildren threw them a celebration at the ranch. The house and yard were full of people. 3 generations gathered to honor the couple who had built this legacy. There were speeches and toasts, laughter and music, and a beautiful cake that Anna had baked and Clara had decorated. Olivia looked around at the faces she loved, at the family she and Wade had created together, and felt a profound sense of gratitude and accomplishment. That night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, she and Wade sat once more on their porch, the same place they had shared so many quiet evenings over the years. The Idaho night was clear and cool, stars scattered thick across the sky, coyotes calling to each other in the distance. 30 years, Wade said, shaking his head in wonder. Feels like both forever and no time at all. I know what you mean, Olivia agreed. Some days I still feel like that terrified girl getting off the stage. Other days that feels like it happened to someone else entirely. You were never just a terrified girl, Wade said firmly. You were brave from the start. You just did not know it yet. I only found my bravery because you showed me it was possible, Olivia said. Because you believed in me when I could not believe in myself. Wade turned to her, his weathered face tender in the lamplight. We saved each other, I think. I was stuck before you came, going through the motions but not really living. You gave me purpose again. You gave me everything that matters. Olivia kissed him, a sweet, lingering kiss that held 30 years of love and partnership and shared life. "We did save each other," she agreed, "and we built something beautiful together." They sat in peaceful silence, hands clasped, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. The ranch was quiet now, the animals settled, the household asleep. This land that had once seemed so foreign and frightening to Olivia had become home in the deepest sense, the place where she was most truly herself, the ground from which everything good in her life had grown. Wade's health began to decline in the winter of 1912. It started with a persistent cough that would not resolve, and by spring, Dr. Morrison had diagnosed weak lungs, probably the result of years of exposure to harsh weather and dust. There was no cure, only management and the slow, inexorable decline that came with age and accumulated wear. Wade faced it with the same steady courage he had always shown, rarely complaining, focused on making the most of whatever time remained. Olivia was terrified, of course. The thought of losing Wade, of facing life without him, brought back all the old anxieties with renewed force. But she had learned over the decades how to be afraid and keep functioning, how to feel the fear and not let it paralyze her. She focused on making Wade comfortable, on ensuring he was surrounded by family, on cherishing every day they still had together. Samuel took over complete management of the ranch, and Wade spent his days sitting on the porch or in his favorite chair by the fireplace, grandchildren climbing on him and reading to him or just keeping him company. Clara visited frequently, reading aloud from books and newspapers, discussing politics and literature and philosophy. Rose brought her veterinarian husband to consult on Wade's care, determined to find something that would help. Anna cooked his favorite meals and told him stories about the ranch's daily operations, keeping him connected to the work he loved. Olivia rarely left his side. After 34 years of marriage, she could not imagine being without him, could not envision a future that did not include his steady presence. They talked for hours, revisiting memories, sharing hopes for their children and grandchildren, saying all the things that needed to be said while there was still time. "I am not afraid," Wade told her one evening in early December as they sat together, his hand weak in hers. "I have had a good life, Olivia. Better than I ever expected or deserved. I got to love you and be loved by you. I got to build something that will last. I got to see our children and grandchildren thriving. I am content." "I am afraid," Olivia whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I am terrified of losing you. I do not know how to exist in a world where you are not here." Wade squeezed her hand with what strength he had left. "You will do what you have always done. You will feel the fear and you will keep moving forward anyway. You will lean on our family and remember everything we built together. And you will be all right, my love. I promise you will be all right." He died peacefully in his sleep 3 days later, surrounded by family, passing gently from life to whatever lay beyond. He was 64 years old and had lived to see his ranch thriving, his children successful, his grandchildren healthy and happy. It was, as deaths go, as good as could be hoped for. But that did not make the grief any easier to bear. Olivia thought she might drown in the sorrow. The house felt empty without Wade's presence, the days stretching ahead bleak and colorless. She went through the motions of life, accepting condolences, helping plan the funeral, trying to be strong for her children and grandchildren. But inside she felt hollowed out, as though some essential part of her had died with him. They buried Wade on the hill beside Martha, with a view of the ranch he had loved and helped build. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half the territory, people from all walks of life coming to pay respects to a man who had been universally liked and admired. Olivia stood at the graveside supported by Samuel on one side and Clara on the other, staring at the pine coffin and trying to comprehend that Wade was truly gone. In the weeks that followed, Olivia discovered that grief was not one thing but many. There was the sharp, piercing pain that struck at unexpected moments. There was the dull, heavy ache that was always present, weighing her down. There was anger at the unfairness of it, fear of the future alone, guilt over things said and unsaid. But there was also gratitude for the years they had shared, and love that death had not and could not diminish. Her children rallied around her, taking turns staying at the house, including her in their daily lives, making sure she was never truly alone. The grandchildren visited constantly, their noise and energy a balm against the silence. And slowly, painfully, Olivia found her footing again. She remembered Wade's final words to her, his confidence that she would be all right. She drew on the courage he had helped her develop over decades, the strength she had learned she possessed. She began to take walks again, around the ranch and into the surrounding hills, relearning the landscape without him. She returned to her weaving, her hands finding comfort in the familiar rhythms. She helped Anna in the kitchen, played with grandchildren, sat with Samuel as he discussed ranch business, seeking her advice and input. She did not simply survive but actively chose to live, to honor Wade's memory by continuing to be the woman he had believed she could be. Spring came, and with it new life. Calves were born, foals dropped, the garden burst into bloom. The cycle of seasons continued as it always had, indifferent to human grief, but also offering hope of renewal. Olivia planted roses on Wade's grave next to Martha's, and stood there one clear April morning looking out over the ranch they had built together. "I am still afraid sometimes," she said aloud, speaking to Wade though she did not know if he could hear. "But you taught me that fear does not have to stop me. You were brave enough for both of us until I learned to be brave myself, and that bravery is still here, still part of me. I will keep going, my love. I will keep living the life we built together. I will be all right, just as you promised." A breeze stirred the grass around the graves, and in the distance, Olivia could hear her grandchildren playing near the house, their laughter bright in the spring air. She stood a moment longer, feeling the sun on her face and the earth solid beneath her feet, feeling the love that had sustained her for 34 years and would sustain her still. Then she turned and walked down the hill toward home, toward family, toward whatever remained of her life. Olivia lived another 18 years, dying peacefully in her sleep in 1930 at the age of 79. She saw the ranch continue to prosper under Samuel's management, saw her grandchildren grow up and begin families of their own, saw the world change in ways she could never have imagined that day in 1878 when she first arrived in Boise. She remained active until the very end, weaving and gardening and being the matriarch around whom the family revolved. When they buried her on the hill beside Wade and Martha, her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered to celebrate a life well lived. They told stories of her courage, her kindness, her quiet strength. They spoke of how she had come to Idaho terrified and alone, and had built a legacy of love and family and perseverance against all odds. And they remembered the man who had stood beside her, who had been brave enough for both of them until she learned to be brave herself, and whose love had transformed both their lives into something extraordinary. The ranch still stands today, passed down through the generations, a testament to what two people can build when they face their fears together and refuse to give up on each other or themselves. The house has been modernized and expanded, but the original log structure remains at its heart. And on the hill overlooking it all, 3 headstones mark the resting places of the people who built this legacy. Martha Torres, beloved friend and family. Wade Norris, devoted husband, father, and rancher. and Olivia Fletcher Norris, who was terrified of everything but learned to be brave.